Hello, I'm Sophie Ikenya. Welcome to Focus on Africa. Our top stories. A situation of anarchy. The Nigerian government sends a special envoy to South Africa as looting and protests against immigrants continue. South Africa's president condemns the violence, saying there can be no justification for attacking people from other countries. The Commonwealth should examine whether Britain has behaved democratically over Brexit, so says the Nigerian writer and Nobel laureate Wole Soyinka. Also in the program, it's a woman's world, they say. So how does it feel to be a male midwife in Burkina Faso?
Since we have the same practices, it's not because it's a man or a woman that there is a difference.
And in sports, more heartache for African teams at the Basketball World Championship as Senegal lose their second game. Thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The Nigerian president has sent a special envoy to South Africa to convey his concern about attacks against immigrants in Johannesburg and other towns. Looting of foreign-owned businesses has continued for a second day in some areas. Now, in a statement on social media, the Nigerian government said the continuing attacks on Nigerian nationals and businesses in South Africa are unacceptable. Enough is enough. Nigeria will take definitive measures to ensure safety and protection of her citizens. A number of other African countries have issued warnings. In Zambia, the Transport Ministry has said that lorry drivers should avoid traveling to South Africa until the security situation improves. Trouble spots or towns should be avoided, as well as movement to other places, except where it is absolutely necessary. Now, Ethiopia has advised its citizens to close their businesses during the ongoing tensions, and they say will be speaking to their foreign affairs spokesperson. But first, the BBC's Nomsa Maseko has this update from Johannesburg.
Police on high alert following attacks on businesses in and around Johannesburg. Many areas still on lockdown after violent unrest which started on Sunday. A number of foreign-owned businesses became the target of the attacks, which saw people beaten, shops looted and property set alight. Business owners are counting the cost of the destruction left in the aftermath of the violence. In this dealership alone, over 20 vehicles were burnt, and there are fears that the violence could spread to other areas. Gauteng Premier David Makhura and other politicians arriving to assess the damage.
Of the vehicles which you see on the road.
The cause of the violence remains unclear, but the South African government insists the attacks are not spurred on by xenophobia.
The criminal element is seizing on a sentiment of people who are raising issues about undocumented foreign nationals, and we are saying that nobody should take the law into their own hands. Yes, where there is xenophobia, because people are attributing particular attitude to foreign nationals, we are saying we are a country that is governed by international conventions. There are people who are asylum seekers, who are refugees, who are coming from countries running away from war. Any democratic country will welcome those people. Of course, we need people to be documented. We want to strengthen border security.
Some angry Johannesburg residents calling on the government to deport undocumented migrants. Foreigners must go. They're bringing drugs into our country. Our children are dying because of them, this woman tells me. But this Nigerian businessman whose shop was also targeted has refuted this claim.
That is not a criminality. This is xenophobia attack. This is not the first time. It's happening regularly. Just talking a backup story, giving a foreigner a lot of allegations of foreigners do this. It's lie. They are lying. Let me say, South African government is lying.
Meanwhile, nearly 100 people have been arrested for their alleged involvement in the attacks, which have been described as a national emergency. Nomsa Maseko, BBC News, Johannesburg.
Well, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has spoken about the unrest. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Now, I'd like to condemn the violence that has been spreading around a number of provinces in our country in the strongest terms. The attacks on people who run businesses from foreign nationals is something that's totally unacceptable. It's something that we cannot allow to happen in South Africa.
Well, let's now take a quick look at other stories making headlines across Africa and the rest of the world. The Algerian Army Chief, Lieutenant General Ahmed Gaid Salah, has said the date for the long-delayed presidential election should be announced by mid-September. It's a move that would see a result in the polls before the end of the year. Elections were expected in July after the former president Abdelaziz Bouteflika resigned in April. Police in Guinea-Bissau have seized nearly 2 tons of cocaine, the largest amount in the country's history. The drugs arrived by sea in the country's northwest, hidden in flurbergs. Police say the shipment came from Colombia and was on its way to Islamist militants. 4 Bissau Guineans, 3 Colombians, and a Malian were arrested. Now, huge areas of the Bahamas are underwater as Hurricane Dorian, one of the most powerful Atlantic storms ever recorded, hovers over the islands. There are reports of unprecedented destruction. At least 5 people died when it hit the nearby Abaco Islands at Category 5 with 185 mph winds. Now, dramatic scenes here in the UK today as members of parliament seek to take control of the parliamentary agenda to stop a no-deal exit from the European Union. These are the live pictures from Parliament where an application is being made or about to be submitted for an emergency debate on no deal. It follows the Prime Minister Boris Johnson's decision to suspend Parliament in the run-up to the official date for Britain to leave the EU. That's on the 31st of October. The suspension, known as a prorogation, will cut the number of working days MPs have in Parliament to try and stop it, with the critics claiming it is a deliberate ploy by the Prime Minister to cut them out. Mr. Johnson's office has warned that he will push for an election on the 14th of October if the government loses. Well, Nigerian writer and Nobel laureate Professor Wole Soyinka has told the BBC that the Commonwealth should take action over what he called the British Prime Minister's undemocratic decision to suspend Parliament ahead of the Brexit deadline.
I think it's the very dare of it. From the moment the concept was mooted by the Prime Minister, I think that was the most dramatic and most shocking, that even such a thought could pass through a parliamentarian, a Democrat, in a country like Great Britain, United Kingdom. The very fact that the head of government, democratically elected in a country like Britain, could even conceive of the idea, how much more actually seem to be getting away with it. And I think that fellow members of the Commonwealth should sit up and take note and examine the protocols of British Political Association and see whether Britain merits suspension from the Commonwealth for setting a bad example in democratic practice. I think that the Commonwealth should take action. The first step, send a fact-finding mission, talk to this man Johnson and see whether he's really he's a citizen, because he's behaving like one of these Putin tradition, brought up in the Putin tradition. I personally, I must tell you, and my associates, we're astonished at this development. This is not an exaggeration. Even though in Nigeria, for instance, thanks to the military, we ended up opting for the American presidential system, the fact is that many members of the Commonwealth, and in this country, Nigeria, think they look at British parliamentary system longingly. The British model seems to have been ingrained in us, whether we like it or not. I never thought it was possible. I never thought I would live to see a prime minister prorogue the parliament.
Wole Soyunke there. Let's go back to our top story, where the violence against foreign-owned businesses in South Africa has been going on for at least 2 days now. And I'm now joined from Cape Town by Jean-Pierre Misago. He's a senior researcher at the African Center for Migration and Society at the University of Witwatersrand. Thanks for taking time to talk to us on Focus on Africa. This seems to be recurring every other year. Why do you think this is going on?
I mean, this violence has been going on for a long time, and it continues today because mainly there hasn't been any appropriate and decisive response from both government and civil society. That's the main reason why it is still happening today.
What is appropriate and decisive response?
From government, we have seen the government denying that xenophobia is a problem, and because of that, there hasn't been any national level policy response. In addition, we haven't seen any action taken against perpetrators. There has been total impunity for those who are behind the violence. Sometimes we see arrests, but those arrests don't touch those who are instigators, who are behind the violence. That's one of the reasons why. Civil society hasn't been able to hold the government accountable or to get it to act, to perform its core function of protecting the country's residents.
Is the argument, though, about foreigners flooding the South African market and really bringing instability or undermining the stability of the country, does it wash?
It doesn't, because that's political populism as we see it across the globe at the moment. At the moment, as we speak, foreign nationals account for 4% of the country's population. So they can't really say they are the cause of all social ills the country is experiencing at the moment. It's just the political leaders and government officials blaming foreign nationals for the failure to deliver services or deliver on political promises.
What do you think the continent should do? We've had the Nigerian president sending their envoy, but is there anything that, say, the African Union can do, or what interventions do you think should be taken?
I mean, to be fair, I think there have been a few countries that have reacted: Nigeria, Mozambique, and sometimes Malawi, but there hasn't been any strong response from the region, for instance, SADC, or from the EU. Sometimes you see that's a political discussion, diplomatic discussion, people praising one another, but really not pressing the government to do something about it. We haven't seen any strong response. What we are seeing now is actually people from those countries trying to act. We have seen now some businesses, South African businesses in Nigeria being affected, some Zimbabweans mobilizing to stop South Africans of breaking down countries. But from governments, really, we haven't seen any decisive response.
So there's much that still needs to be done. Dr. Jean-Pierre Misago, thank you for taking time to talk to us and Focus on Africa. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Still to come, we'll recap the last-minute deals involving some of African football's biggest names as the European football transfer window closed on Monday night. I'm Sophie Ikenye, and you're watching Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The top story on this program: the Nigerian president has sent a special envoy to South Africa to convey his concern about attacks against immigrants. Now, did you know that a third of midwives in Burkina Faso are men? The initiative to train up men in the role was introduced because of concerns over women's safety in remote areas. So what is it like to work as a male midwife in Burkina Faso? Selina Jigo went to find out.
With expert hands, Brahim Kobre carefully measures his pregnant patient's growing belly. The technique used to measure fetal growth is a gesture he's been repeating for 20 years as a midwife.
Being called midwife doesn't disturb me at all, since we have the same practices. It's not because it's a man or a woman that there is a difference.
In 1985, a decree was issued permitting men to practice as midwives in Burkina Faso. The first male midwives were sent to remote areas of the country. where female midwives were unable to go due to security concerns as well as cultural and familial restrictions. Then Minister of Health Abdusalam Kabore formalized the proactive policy.
I was at the time taken to task by the Association of Midwives, who told me that we cannot send single women in the bush, etc., etc. But it gave me an idea. I thought, well, why can't we create male midwives position? And that's why I learned the word maïtician myself, the term in French. So I called my colleagues, my workmates, and we created the position of male midwife in Burkina Faso.
Today, according to Burkina Faso's Midwives Association, 30% of the midwives in the country are men. Some women feel more comfortable with female midwives who have traditionally dominated the profession. What do female midwives think about their male midwives' colleagues? I have asked the question to the president of Burkina Faso's Midwives Association.
We have a good feedback because male midwives do exactly the same thing female midwives do. We have the same training, they are accepted by people, whether in cities or in rural areas. So far there is no problem. Initially, people thought they would be rejected by some communities, but there is no place where they are rejected.
Midwifery training begins in remote rural areas of the country with restricted access to adequate health care. Recent graduate Yakube Towe has just joined his first post in Tougué, more than 200 kilometers from Ouagadougou. It's a long way from home for him, but he says the practice is his passion.
Male midwife is a noble profession. You know, when you are the first to have the baby in your hands, before the delivery, you help the mom be in good shape all along her pregnancy until she gives birth. You're definitely happy for that.
While male midwifery is rare in Francophone Africa, Burkina Faso is seeing a steady change in the vocation's makeup as more and more men begin to train in this much-needed profession. Sidina Linjigo, BBC News, Burkina Faso.
You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. Let's find out what's happening in the world of sports. Pierre-Antoine.
Many thanks, Sophie. And today we'll start with basketball. And it is clearly not going well for the African teams at the World Championship, currently underway in China. Senegal, after losing their opening game, has lost again, this time against Australia, 81-68. They held strong in the first half, but could not maintain the defensive effort in the second half. They now have to win against Canada on Thursday to hope for a qualification to the next round. Let's move on now to rugby as the World Cup starts in 2 weeks in Japan. So all the teams are finalizing their preparations ahead of the big event. The South African Springboks are among the favourites to win the tournament, but will have to face New Zealand, the double reigning champions in the group. In light of these massive games, the Boks coach Rassie Erasmus decided to arrive early in Japan to play the host of this year's tournament in a friendly on Friday. Erasmus explains why.
So if we manage to go all the way, it's a small sacrifice, 1 week extra. And then, these conditions which we've trained in these 3 days, we'll think we'll get the benefits from that because it's totally different. We already felt the heat, the humidity, the ball, and then the other teams who only arrive next week, they must then go the week after that. So I think we'll definitely reap the benefits, and as I say, it's only 1 week extra.
Let's talk football as the transfer market closed in all the European leagues on Monday evening, and a few deals passed over the line in the closing minutes of the window. Algerian international Rachid Ghezal has left the Premier League for Italian side Fiorentina on loan with an option to buy. Another Algerian international was on the move yesterday. It's Hicham Boudaoui, who joined French Ligue 1 side OGC Nice. The 19-year-old was part of the Algerian team that won the 2019 African Cup of Nations. And finally, Gabonese international Mario Lemina left Premier League side Southampton for Turkey and Istanbul as he joins Galatasaray on loan with, like Ghezal, an option to buy at the end of the season. That's all for the sports, Sophie, today. Back to you.
Thank you, Pierre-Antoine. Thank you. Now, Malawian rapper Physics has launched a campaign demanding that the political establishment meets the needs of young people in the country. Speaking to Debula Kemoli from the BBC Africa Children's Programme, What's New, he says his music is the best platform to launch his sort of activism.
Primarily for me, I make music of hope. That's the music that I like to make, and I like to relate it to my life. Mutipata, it's a question. The question is going to our leaders. Are you going to give us? The song, the idea, and the campaign was conceived around when the tripartite elections in Malawi were coming. So, as a youth of Malawi, we're facing unemployment, we're facing insecurity, girls failing to go to school because they can't afford to buy sanitary pads. And education is a human right. What are we doing about these issues? So it became a campaign, it became a social media frenzy, and eventually the wife of the former vice president even did her own rap song. So it meant the message reached where we're supposed to go.
What kind of messages or what do you talk about in your music?
When my dad passed on, my mom was very sick, retired. We moved from an urban area, went to an area that's considered as a ghetto. Life became really bad. So my escape was hip-hop music. When I started rapping, I was sort of like a storyteller to explain the situations that were around me in the ghetto of Area 25, where we moved.
How, in terms of reaching other groups of people who don't speak Chichewa, or even beyond Malawi, do you think there might be a difficulty, or it doesn't matter with the languages that you use?
Previously, I was doing all English music or a little bit of Chichewa. The songs never really took off. The song that took off and really made me a household name was an all Chichewa song. It's called Chola Pizza. Chola Pizza is talking about somebody who's not bothered. I started out when I was in the ghetto, I didn't have all the nice shoes, not all the nice clothes. It was just a typical ghetto boy. But I was like, you know what? I'm cool like that. So, I'm not bothered about what you say about me or what you think about me. I know my value. I know my worth.
So what advice do you have to anybody who's going through struggles?
No situation is permanent. Where you are is not where you will always be. Change is constant. We're going through ups, we're going through downs. But at the end of the day, no situation is permanent. Never lose hope.
Well, before we go, a quick look at our top story here on Focus on Africa. The Nigerian president has sent a special envoy to South Africa to convey his concern about attacks against immigrants in Johannesburg and other towns. Looting of foreign-owned businesses has continued for a second day in some areas. Now, in a statement on social media, the Nigerian government said, quote-unquote, the continuing attacks on Nigerian nationals and businesses in South Africa are unacceptable. Now, a number of other African countries have issued warnings. In Zambia, the Transport Ministry has said that lorry drivers should avoid traveling to South Africa until the security situation improves. And Ethiopia has advised its citizens to close their businesses during the ongoing tensions. Don't forget, you can get in touch with me and some of the team on social media. I'm Atsi Kenyan. Thanks for your company.